Hello and welcome to another edition of Remy's Rave of the Day. I'm your host, Remy, or better known as Remington Avery, youth minister at the Meadows Church of Christ, right here in Beaumont in the great state of Texas. We are not going to be raving about a word or a phrase. We're going to be raving about a message in which I had the opportunity to deliver this morning at our local preachers meeting. And so I pray that it is edifying to you. I pray that it will give you some kind of hope today. Let me share with you just some of the brief general things that were said in that message. The title of this message was Fathers, What Do Your Children Deserve to See? Fathers, what do your children deserve to see? I think you can also rework that question by saying grandfathers. What does your grandchildren need to see? The way that lesson started out, it started out with introducing a book. A book by the author's name is Michaeline Duclef. She wrote a book called Hunt, Gather, and Parent. She wrote that kind of a book, and she's looking at these different ancient cultures to shed a light on, look how they're rearing their children, training their children, and she's communicating to us, Western families, we might want to take a lesson or two from how other cultures are raising their children, how they are parenting. And one of those cultures is what is called Inuit parents. Some of us, if you don't know what that is, as far as that culture, maybe the idea of an Eskimo, the Arctic people, that is who that is. Well, in that section of her book, Hunt, Gather, Parent, she talks about emotional intelligence and how they are so good when it comes to the idea of thinking before acting, before you do something, and how children are going to develop that concept by how their parents implement that concept, the concept of thinking before acting. And then we went into this idea of not only do your children need to see you formulate, play out that concept, think before you act, but also fathers and grandfathers, your children and grandchildren need to see you as a real man. And I think you would agree with this. Christians, we would define a man in one way, and the world would define it in another way. We would say the very opposite of how Christians would define the word. What is a real man? You know, we could say something like this: a real man is someone who, maybe someone has a daughter and they are training their daughter, they're raising their daughter in such a way on what it means to be a Christian woman, to be modest, to be godly, what to look for in a Christian spouse one day. For those who have Christian boys or who are going to be Christian boys, we teach our boys on what it means to be kind to women, how to treat women, how to be a gentleman to those different women, the women that are coming to in their lives, but of course especially that one spouse whom they choose for their forever mate. And so that's how we would probably define the word a real man, or at least that concept of it. And so when we ask the question, fathers, grandfathers, what does your children, grandchildren need to see from you? And we covered three observations. Number one, that sin is black and white. Number two, they need to see from you that you have an unshakable faith. And then number three, the home is the training ground. Sin is black and white. You can be able to look in James chapter 4, verse 17. Therefore, the one who knows the right thing to do and they don't do it, to him it is sin. And in context, we ask the question, okay, what is being disobeyed? Who is disobeying? And I think you can just go to the beginning of James chapter 4, about verses 1 through 4, especially verse 4, when James says, you guys are adulteresses. You guys are friends with the world, which makes you an enemy of God. And in contrast to that, in James chapter 2, verse 23, James 2, verse 23 says that Abraham was called the friend of God because he had faith and he had works of obedience, which equaled justification for him. So James says, you want to be a friend of God, not a friend of the world? Then here's what you need to do. You go to verse 7 through 12 of James 4, and you submit to God. You resist the devil, and he will flee from you. You draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. That is the right thing to do. Why is that? It's because sin is black and it is white. There is a right, there is a wrong. Right is right, and wrong is wrong. You can go to 1 John chapter 3 verse 4, where it talks about the idea of everyone who practices sin also practices lawlessness, and sin is lawlessness. Why is sin lawlessness? Because you can go down to verse 8 and be able to figure out that sin is of the devil. You can go to verse 9 of 1 John chapter 3 and figure out that for those who practice intentional sin, they are not of God. They are not born of God. They do not belong to God. Sin is black and it is white. Right. There is a right way to do things. There is a wrong way to do things. And God has clearly defined what sin is. He has defined what is right and what is wrong. Number 2, your children, grandchildren need to see from you an unshakable faith. You go to Matthew chapter 8, 5 through 13, where a Roman centurion encounters Jesus, and he's wanting his servant to be healed. He is suffering. He is going through pain. Jesus wants to come over. The centurion says, no, you don't need to come over. I recognize you have a greater power than I do, more authority than I do. You're not worthy to come under my roof. And so as the story goes on to say, you have Jesus showing the demonstration of he has the power to heal over time in space. In other words, in Matthew chapter 8, 5 through 13, healing that centurion's servant, Jesus doesn't have to be in the literal room to heal somebody. He could be a mile away. He can just say the word that person is healed, and that person is going to be healed. And that's exactly what happens. But if you focus your attention to verse 10 of Matthew chapter 8, you begin to see what Jesus says. He was marveled at the faith this centurion had. He had a unshakable faith. And for those who were seeing that play out, there was Jews there. They were present there. And it should have been a lesson for them saying, look, this guy who did not grow up with the prophets and Psalms and things like that, this person shows an unshakable faith. We only had this kind of contact one time. Jews, where are you? Where's your faith in me? And I think it's pretty cool here that if you stick in Matthew chapter 8 and you go to verse 24 through 27, that's that incident where the disciples are on the storm or on the Sea of Galilee, and then here comes a storm. This is pretty cool. He asked that question, why do you have little faith? And so it's like as if Jesus says, you know, disciples, you remember that incident with the centurion? Do you remember the faith that he showed? You know, how come you don't have that? I know the circumstances are crazy. You're in the middle of a storm, but you're with me. I'm here with you. Everything should be calm. Everything should be good. Did you not learn from what just took place there? How I even have the power to heal over time in space. And I think this is really cool too, because in that section, Matthew chapter 8, the things that are arranged as far as the stories, the healings there, I don't think it's a coincidence how they were put together. In other words, if you were to back up to verse 18 through 22 of Matthew chapter 8, I think we can get an answer to the question when Jesus asked the disciples, when that storm came on the sea, why do you have little faith? Why do you have what appears to be a shakeable faith? How come you don't have a unshakable faith? Well, in verse 18 through 22, Jesus talks about discipleship. He talks about counting the cost. He talks about making Jesus first, prioritizing Jesus first in one's life. And you know, fathers and grandfathers, that's exactly what your children deserve to see. A faith that is unshakable, and it becomes unshakable when you surrender all to Jesus. You are so sacrificial in relationship to him, and you are going to put him number one. Whatever is going on in your life, you make that number 2, 3, and 4, and all those other things that are important to you, what seems important to you. As long as they're 2, 3, and 4, and you keep Jesus number 1, everything's going to go right in line with your life. But sometimes we may put whatever 3 and 4 is, and we make it number 1, and then all of a sudden Jesus drops down to 3 or 4, or whatever the case may be. And so when those storms come, we don't have a unshakable faith. Our faith is shaken when those unforeseen circumstances come into play into our lives. And so I think it's pretty cool in Matthew chapter 8 what he's trying to do there. And what I'm trying to say is, fathers, grandfathers, our children deserve to see from you, number one, sin is black and white, right is right, wrong is wrong, but they deserve to see an unshakable faith. And how they see that unshakable faith is through the idea of, are you counting the cost? Are you a truly committed disciple of Jesus? Are you making Jesus first and then making yourself second? And then number three, we talked about this idea of the home is the training ground. And I really want you to notice that I didn't say the home is a training ground, but it is the training ground. It needs to be reminded that preachers and elders and deacons or just leaders of the church, they are not in charge of making sure your children, those who are in the youth, for the young people there at the church, they are not in charge to make sure your children get to heaven. Are they there to assist? Absolutely. I am for that. I believe the church should assist in every way possible, help families, help parents rear their children into being what I call a spiritual champion for God. But you need to notice a cool pattern in the Bible. All the way beginning into Deuteronomy chapter 6, when the law of Moses into play. And since Deuteronomy chapter 6, God has always had the plan, the blueprint, that it is to be the mom and the dad. They are to be, the home is to be the training ground. And it's pretty cool how it says they are to diligently teach their children. It's not teaching them just over here every occasion or over there every once in a while. It's diligent teaching to their children. I think it's pretty cool. As you go a little bit forward in time, you can go to 1 Kings chapter 2, 1 through 3. 1 Kings chapter 2, 1 through 3. King David's on his deathbed, fixing to die, and he's charging his son Solomon and basically saying, Solomon, my boy, keep the commandments of the Lord. Keep his testimonies, keep his statutes, because you go into verse number 4 of 1 Kings chapter 2, and paraphrasing, he says, if you do these things, my boy, guess what? You are going to be spiritually successful. Spiritually successful as a father, as a husband, and as the king of Israel. And then Solomon, if we know the guy Solomon like I do and like you do, we would know that maybe we would say he started out pretty good, and then as his life continued, we got messed up here and there. But then God, through his power, through that strength, told Solomon, hey, I need you to write a book called Proverbs. You need to write it to your sons. So you see this cool pattern of David, the father, taught his boy Solomon to do some things. Solomon, when he becomes a father, he tells his son a thing or two, hence the book of Proverbs, telling him wisdom. Son, don't follow in my footsteps. I've been there. I've lived life. I know what this is like. Take heed to my words. But we also can't forget this message right in Proverbs. He says, don't forsake your mother's teaching. So see, it's always been the home. The home has been the training ground. And so we looked at those couple of different things as far as in our preacher's meeting. And so again, this is what we're raving about. Not a particular word or phrase today, but just wanted to bring that to light to you, because there's maybe someone needs to hear something like this today about fathers, grandfathers. Your children deserve to see something from you. And again, it's number one, sin is black and white. Number two, your children need to see from you that you need to have an unshakable faith. And then number three, the home is the training ground. I'll end with this, one of my favorite passages of the Bible. Psalm 112, 1 and 2 talk about how blessed is the man who fears the Lord, who takes delight in his commandments. His descendants will be mighty on the earth. His generation will be upright. It will be blessed. Why is that? Because you have that man in verse 1 of Psalm 112. He's, number one, fearing the Lord. He's acknowledging who God is. He's acknowledging his position as well as acknowledging his own position. In other words, I see God as perfect and holy, man, so righteous. I'm not perfect, but I still delight in his commandments. I still obey. Remember, I still know and believe right is right and wrong is wrong. I'm having this unshakable faith. That's why I delight in his commandments. And then it goes on in verse 2, his descendants, his generation will be blessed. They will be mighty upon the earth. And here's what I want us to end with this rave for today, is that we cannot have mighty generations without mighty men. That's exactly it. We cannot have mighty generations without mighty men. And so therefore, mighty men, fathers and grandfathers, you need to know sin is black and white. You need to have an unshakable faith, and you need to realize that your home is the training ground. It's not the church. The church there is to assist you. I pray the church is assisting you. I pray this is encouraging and uplifting to you. Please consider liking and sharing this video, as well as liking and sharing our page, trying to bring out a lot of content, trying to bring a lot of traffic to let people know we're here, trying to spread the good news. So I want to give a couple shout outs. This Saturday, we have a Friends and Family Day. Gonna have a whole tons of fun, inflatables and snow cones and things of that nature. It's from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. at the Meadows Church of Christ building, and we want you to come out. We want you to come have fun with us, and even after that, we want you to come to worship with us Sunday mornings at 9:30 a.m. That's when we worship. And then Bible class at 11 a.m. And then we meet on Sunday evenings at 5 p.m. and in the middle of the week at 6:30 p.m. And also, just as a reminder, we have another video series that is going on our page. It's called The Morning Seed. It's basically a video series on how to obey the gospel, how to become a Christian. And so if I remember correctly, we are on episode 4, and we're going to talk about that latter half of Acts chapter 2, verse 38, the idea of receiving the gift of the Holy Spirit. What does that mean? What does that phrase mean? What does the Bible have to say about that? Because we've talked about the other parts of Acts 2:38, and so I think it's only fair that we also address that part, because I think it would be unfair not to talk about it and then go off to something else. And so that's what we're going to do. We usually do that on Saturday mornings at around 10 a.m. But because of that Friends and Family Day, we're going to shift, and we're going to do it tomorrow at 10 a.m. So if you're one of those people who tunes into that video series, feel free to tune in or view it later. It will be archived in our page, so be able to go find it. The Morning Seed episode 4, we'll do that tomorrow around 10 a.m. And so just want to give a couple of shout outs again. Please consider liking this video, as well as sharing it, as well as liking and sharing our page. This has been another edition of Remy's Rave of the Day, episode 31. Just raving about a simple message that was given at our preacher's luncheon today. And so again, I pray that it's encouraging to you. Pray it's uplifting to you. And again, have a great rest of your day. It's a beautiful day outside. Continue to have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you next time, Lord willing, tomorrow at 10 a.m., but also at 3 p.m. for another edition of Remy's Rave of the Day. Godspeed.